When I started writing Harriet, I was in such a rush to just write. I didn't take the time to develop the world. I figured generic world building would be enough. See, I wanted to avoid researching because when I do it, I get overwhelmed. I go off on tangents, I spiral, and I tend to get very in my head. I wanted to avoid all that and just focus on writing. But after my 4th break from writing, I finally calmed down enough to admit I need to world build. I need some sort of roadmap, no matter how exhausted the thought of one makes me. I actually started working on this video back in December 2024, but ultimately shelved it while working on other, more relevant videos. It's been interesting revisiting my notes and making updates here and there. This isn't going to be a deep dive, just a few blocks I started building on. So come along with me as I attempt to world build. Quick warning, names may be mispronounced. I apologize in advance. Let's start with magic since it ended up influencing my story the most. Looking back, I can't imagine my story without magic, and yet I added it in so casually. I love magic. It feels like a waste to write a fantasy without some form of magic. But I didn't want to make it too big a part of my story, more of a fun background detail. But how could I include magic in my world and not have it impact my story? So I thought, let's figure out my magic system at least. I had 2 ideas. One, since Harriet is reincarnated, maybe the reason she remembers her past life is because of magic. And 2, this vague idea of teens using elemental magic in a school setting. Something that happens a lot in light novels, especially reincarnated, transmigrated into a novel Otome Dream light novels. But I didn't want Harriet to be a teenager, and I have no interest in writing a school setting right now, so I decided to think on this more. I looked into how to create a magic system and found every book I read referred to Brandon Sanderson's 3 Laws of Magic. You want to create a magic system that readers can understand. They should know what can and can't be done with magic. This can be harder with a soft magic system, but basically you want to avoid the feeling that a wizard did it, as that can be very unsatisfying. Next, limitations make stories better. Sure, power fantasies can be fun, but you risk having readers constantly question inconsistencies, such as why a character didn't just use magic to solve that problem, but they did that other problem. And not everyone can do power creep well. Lastly, try to expand on what you already have. This way you can avoid making things unnecessarily complicated. I'm going to briefly talk about soft and hard magic systems. Basically, soft magic systems are more vague and mysterious, while hard magic systems are predictable and consistent, easier for readers to follow and understand. They both have their benefits and disadvantages, and like most things, magic systems can land anywhere on the spectrum of hard and soft. It's about what best fits your story's narrative. I personally like hard magic systems, but my instinctual love of vagueness usually leans towards more of a soft magic system. But then I'm like, no, must add rules. It's a process. Since I first thought of an elemental magic system, let's go over what Timothy Hickson of the YouTube channel Hello Future Me says about it in his book On Writing and World Building Volume 3. According to Hickson, the pre-existing context of each elemental magic, i.e. fire with danger and passion, earth with renewal and growth, the pre-existing thematic depth, makes it easier to code your characters and world with ideas, arcs, and qualities. I personally don't want to do this in Harriet though. I'm more using elemental magic as a tool rather than a way to develop a character's trait and such. I'm not even that attached to it. It just seems like the easiest kind of magic system to have. So I ended up dropping the idea of including it specifically. But I did find the section of laws on magic system and relative tension helpful. How can you communicate the cost of using elemental magic without it coming off as too convenient for the plot to happen? Hickson brings up Percy Jackson and the Olympians and how the author Rick Riordan repeatedly demonstrates the specific set of Percy's abilities. By showing Percy using these skills repeatedly, we can understand their limits, scope, where they apply, where they don't, what they can do, and what they can't. Meaning problem solving in the plot comes down to how he uses these established powers. And this can be applied to all types of magic, not just elemental. I actually found Randy Elfson's 7 Laws in his book Cultures and Beyond, The Art of World Building 3 really helpful. He really got me thinking about what I wanted magic to be and do in my story, which led to me realizing my story has 3 magic systems. These aren't their names, but for this video, I'll call them blood magic, black magic, and wand magic. At first, I had planned to make wand users artifact users, but as I thought about it more, I realized that I should just simplify it. Just make it used by mages who use wands to control or channel magic. No need to make it too unique or complicated. So what are Elfson's 7 laws? These are just guidelines to help you figure out how magic functions in your world. This is tentative, but I did reflect a lot on laws 2 to 4. It became clear to me that wand magic is very dangerous, because ever since the royal family created a barrier around the kingdom, isolating it from the world outside, they no longer had access to new wands. So to use wand magic, they need to use relics that are over 157 years old, some of which have deteriorated, increasing the risk of using them. This type of magic is more commonly used by nobles and law enforcement. I can see the royal family regulating it, enforcing this with a task force that's allowed access to it, but not letting it be used for personal gain. It's just too risky. There are real risk and scarcity to accessing it. As for black magic, that's innate and usually not powerful enough to do much. Just assist its user in understanding a type of truth, which is why Harriet can see the past, but she can't do anything about it. She can't change it. The most easily controlled magic is blood magic, used by royals, and they use it to isolate and protect the country from magic miasma. Now, Elfson goes over the different options for magic origins. I like the idea of it coming from the planet, from the core up through the dirt. Thankfully, it's not necessary to explain your magic's origins to readers. This is more info for myself, but I like the idea that magic just exists all around us, and that those with talent or affinity can sense and manipulate it. I already know the cost of my magic, being devoured by it, but Elfson also brings up law, crime, and punishment. What happens to those who misuse magic in my story? Outside of risking devouring, is there anything legally? I suppose the magic royalty uses trumps anything non-royalty can use, and they can always take away access to wands. So as long as people fear, revere, and trust the king, they have no fear or worries about being affected by magic via wands. I had a lot of fun thinking about this. I still feel like there's more to develop, but for now I have a better sense of my story's narrative and the role my magic system will play. I can't even imagine what my story would be without magic, which is wild, because again, I had no plans to include it, but now my story wouldn't make sense without it. Wild. I became obsessed with knowing what each noble title means, how much land they own, and what responsibilities and perks they come with. But it was more me being obsessed with the feeling of wanting to know, not so much me caring about the answers. And I'm not sure how much of this I'm actually going to use in my story. But, I'm still writing it, so maybe. I started my journey with the book Putting the Fact in Fantasy. As fantasy authors, you do not need to cleave to any existing real-world system as long as yours is created with the reasonable, self-consistent logic, says Tahara Safavi in the chapter A Quick and Dirty Guide to Feudal Nobility. Basically, feudalism is all about owning land. I'm actually just going to read how she describes a lord. The basic premise was that those who could take something did. Of course, if a conqueror spent all his time taking things, he was too busy to grow his own food. He had to convince farmers to give him a share of their crops. How to accomplish that? Show up at their houses with all his sword-toting buddies and take it. By now you're hopefully starting to picture the king and all his peers a lot less like dandies in frilly lace collars and a lot more like heavily armed thugs. This is where you get the concept of a landlord. All land belongs to the lord who conquered it. He permits farmers to live there in exchange for tithes. There are also freeholders who own their own farms, but if you're not packing enough heat to kill the lord and his thugs, it's best to enter his protection racket instead. As these protection rackets grow, the lord can't manage it all directly, so he taps some of his favorite armed thug buddies to run parts of it for him. He creates them. The newly promoted muscle gets to live large in exchange for managing taxing and defending his new turf. The lord is essentially a cartel boss. She then goes into how, in history, the system keeps changing. During the reign of William I, there were exactly 3 types of nobility: king, earl, and baron. By 1611, there were 7: king, duke, marquis, earl, which is equivalent to a count, viscount, baron, and baronet, with a grand duke being above a regular duke and a baronet below a baron. Weirdly enough, an earl's wife was called a countess, unlike a duke's and baron's wives, which were called duchess and baroness. The rest of the chapter went into specific forms of address full of examples of what is and isn't okay. My main takeaway from this was that knights are referred to as sir, and it's common to refer to someone by the name of the land they own. Unfortunately, this chapter did not answer my questions exactly, so I continued searching. I checked websites like the Imperial, Royal, and Noble Ranks Wiki, a guide to the noble titles of medieval Europe for writers, Debet's guide to the ranks and privileges of the peerage, but none of these felt quite like what I was looking for. At most, I learned that marquises are associated with borders, which did tempt me to make Harriet that a marquise, but I ended up changing my mind. I realized I didn't want Harriet to have real responsibilities. I gave in to the temptation and bought Medieval Underpants and Other Blunders by Susan Allen. Alas, the chapter Bloopers, English Aristocrats, and Royal Titles taught me only how nobility should be addressed. Like, it goes in depth into titles and forms of address. If you are unsure how a character, say the daughter of an earl, should be addressed, this is the book for you. I now know that my daughter of a duke should be referred to as Lady Lucy Ann Bossens, but Harriet isn't Lady Harriet Rideau unless she's the daughter of a duke, marquise, or earl. There's so many rules. It's fascinating, but a little confusing. And my biggest takeaway from this chapter was that a reigning monarch is never addressed as, say, King Edward I for obvious reasons, and monarchs are not referred to as Henry V on page. When speaking, we say Henry V, and it can be written as such during dialogue, but when writing down the name and Roman numeral of a monarch, it's written as Henry V. Henry V? And the is implied. Considering I have a royal character named Cormac V, this was good to know. I also found this Reddit thread and learned that a comprehensive list of the relations between titles is almost impossible to make because of how messy the system of noble hierarchy was in Europe. So that's real helpful. Finally, I just asked ChatGPT. I'm unsure how accurate this chart is, but it's good enough as a reference, and it helped me stop fixating on it. I did end up making Harriet's dad a baron. According to ChatGPT, children of barons and viscounts are referred to as the Honorable. So she be called the Honorable Harriet Rideau, Miss Rideau, or simply Harriet. Honestly, I'm probably going to just stick with Miss Rideau and Harriet, unless there's like some sort of ball. Honestly, I hate to say this, but just using ChatGPT and not having to search for the information via physical books it's just really helpful. While taking a break from writing, I wanted to at least read books similar to my story, see what they did that I liked and didn't like. I ended up searching my bookshelf and found I Swear I Won't Bother You Again, Volume 1. It's not a Korean medieval fantasy about a girl who reincarnated into a book, what I'm going for, but it is a Japanese medieval fantasy about a girl who's reborn, so close enough. Unfortunately, I realized by chapter 4 that this story's vibe wasn't what I was looking for, but I did take away from it that aristocrats have a responsibility to the people, which I could try incorporating more in Harriet. But saying it out loud makes me think of the poem White Man's Burden and how maybe this responsibility isn't always a good thing. Next, I read Laut of Count's Family Volume 1, which is a Korean medieval fantasy about a man who transmigrates into a novel, much closer to what I'm looking for. I went wild, underlining anything that might be helpful for my world building, like what to call Harriet's family home. Now I know, estate is fine. I really admire the world building in Laut. It made me realize how small Harriet's world was, but I especially liked how the author described things without getting descriptive. It's been a while, I couldn't find good examples, but I did find the soldiers showed up with their helmets on, and he was dressed to the nines in formal clothing. It's just enough for you to fill in the gaps with your imagination. I had some time before my pre-order of Laut 2 arrived, so I read the last book I found with a similar type of setting, Loyal Soldier, Lustful Beast, another Japanese medieval fantasy setting. This one about a woman who falls for a soldier and is forced to marry the king, who then uses her to control said soldier. Honestly, this wasn't similar to Harriet at all, outside of there being nobles and a king, I guess. I struggle a bit reading this too. I bought this back when I was in my smut era, but now I'm just not in that mood anymore. I want more plot. But here, everything was about the romance. Not a bad thing, it's just not what I'm looking for right now. I managed to force myself to finish it, very proud. Then read Laut Volume 2, and decided to take a break from these types of books in the meanwhile because I do like them, but I don't love them. So I just wanted to read Danmei, you know? I did end up buying The Tyrant's Etiquette Teacher Volume 1, a Korean medieval fantasy about a woman transmigrating into a book and teaching the tyrant etiquette, which just seems helpful to know, as well as Under the Oak Tree Volume 1, a Korean medieval fantasy with magic that, according to Reddit, is either a realistic depiction of trauma and a slow burn romance, or an aggravating read where the main couple should break up. I read a fan translation of this a long time ago, just a few chapters. I think I liked it, but I can't remember anything about it. Turns out there's a bunch of smut, but also plot, so yay. It's such a pretty book though. I mean, look at it. It's beautiful. Outside of this random sentence on the side for some reason. And it includes a map. I plan to read these eventually. Plus, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint Volume 1 will finally be available in July. This is Korean, but not a medieval fantasy, about a guy who transmigrates into the web novel he loved. I never finished reading its fan translation either, but I remember really liking it, so I'm really excited. I love fantasy maps. I'm actually really bummed Laut didn't include a map. I grew up reading fantasy books, and even though I didn't actually use the map to do anything, just having it there was just so great, you know? So I figured I should create one too. Somehow, I was lucky enough to stumble upon the video, How to Make a Fantasy World Map in Minutes, and quickly created a tentative map for the country of Leth. After this, I read the chapter on maps in world building for fantasy fans and authors by M.D. Presley and learned there are downsides to including maps. Turns out maps put constraints on authors. See, when depending upon the written word alone, locations are left rather ambiguous, which allows for more spatial leeway and fuzzy travel times. Without a visual reckoning that the distance between King's Landing to Winterfell is twice that of King's Landing to Lannisport, the audience of Game of Thrones would not care in the least when it takes the same amount of time to travel to both of them. But once those visual representations are set up upon the page, the author is now beholden to these consistent location, distances, and terrain. I never considered this, but it's not like this is a bad thing. After all, limitations make stories more interesting. So I get why including a map could be a bad idea, but I still love them and plan to use them at least for myself to get a better sense of where everything is. Names, the bane of my existence. In my personal opinion, coming up with names is one of the worst parts of developing a story. Going into Harriet, I had an idea for the names of 3 characters, but that's it. Luckily, I own 2 naming books because I do not like using character name generator websites. I ended up not using the Writer's Digest character naming sourcebook 2nd edition. Instead, I used the Baby Name Wizard 4th edition. It was more aesthetically pleasing, and while it doesn't mention what each name means, it does include nicknames and names for siblings, which was extremely helpful. I ended up Googling last names once I figured out my characters' first names and origins using these 3 websites, and no, I did not enjoy it. This Reddit thread taught me to try naming my cities and such after defining characteristics. Though I ended up randomly naming my country, no clue what it's based on or if it means anything, but it's the country of Let. What's nice about Hickson's On Writing and World Building series is he does go into how to improve your writing, not just world building advice, which is why it's called On Writing and World Building. Now, I find when I write descriptions, I kind of go blank and get as wordy as possible or don't describe anything at all. I would like to fix this. First, I read the chapter Environmental Descriptions, and while I've heard similar advice before, I really vibed with this chapter. Rather than describing settings in detail, Hickson recommends focusing on general impressions, feelings, and the experience of places. Use the 5 senses, not just sight, to create an impression. Maybe impose the character's desire on how they view their surroundings, because people never describe a place purely objectively. It's nearly always framed by their experiences. So consider which details your character would minimize, emphasize, or notice that others would not. Learn where to be specific and where to be general. Like if you want a reader to visualize things closer to what you have in your mind, or elements especially important to your characters, be specific. But try not to exaggerate descriptions to the point they become gimmicky. Word choice matters. What words you choose changes how readers perceive it visually and emotionally. Now, descriptions can also reinforce theme. It can be used to explore how a character's perception of a place may have changed. It can also be used to create tension, introduce questions, or establish threats. It can be relevant to setup and payoff, i.e. Chekhov's gun. By spending a lot of time describing this or that, it's setting it up to be a more important element of the setting or more narratively relevant. But don't worry, Hickson understands that sometimes you just want to describe something. If you like it, describe it. Don't stunt your style to cater to others, because no story is going to work for everyone. Still, try not to describe when it's irrelevant and slowing the story down, especially if it's a setting readers can easily imagine. Try adding character actions to descriptions of scenes. Have them engage with their surroundings rather than stop and describe the scene first, which can hurt your story's pacing. Description doesn't need to be regulated to the beginning of the scene, but can be woven into dialogue, conflict, and character introspection, simultaneously building out the world while progressing the scene. Next, I read the chapter Characters Descriptions, which broke me. Much like describing a setting, in order to create a vivid character description, you need more than a list of just physical features. It's important to accept that readers won't see exactly what you see, and even you might not see the character the same every time. It's about letting readers make their own interpretations, and writers perhaps focusing on highlighting a few memorable or distinguishing features. It's not just which features you communicate to the reader, but which features you return to and repeat that leave an impression. Reminds me of how in Lao, Kale's red hair is a feature the author repeatedly describes. So consider not just the character's distinct visual features, but features which arise from their quirks, flaws, strengths, beliefs, story role, and struggle. Try to use metaphors and similes, not just adjectives. Allude to the type of person the character is. Consider describing their posture, movement, and facial features rather than just what they're wearing. Let readers imagine that part on their own. Again, like the author of Lout does. We like to focus on characters' thoughts, their feelings, their features, but so much of characterization is about how they interact with things external to them. How a character describes another character can tell you about who they are too. Honestly, the different ways character description can be used overwhelmed me in a way the chapter about describing settings didn't. I don't know why. There's so many things to consider, like using it to develop theme or concept, to depict relationships, to set the scene, communicate backstory, depict how they view themselves or others, depict biases, etc. I honestly feel like this chapter is too advanced for my current level. Maybe once I write more, I can try incorporating all this into a later draft, but for now, I'm just focusing on describing distinguishable features. I feel like I have a lot of world building left to do, but for now this is enough to start building on. I'm still figuring out what I should and shouldn't look into. Like, there was a period I became obsessed with knowing exactly what the inside of a carriage looked like. Exactly. Did this knowledge actually matter? Was I really going to describe in specific detail the inside of a carriage when Harriet rode in one? No. I worry that my desire to know what each noble title meant exactly bordered on being as unnecessary, but only time will tell. As this video comes to a close, I find myself reflecting. Should I read Annihilation? The examples Hickson used have left me intrigued. But more importantly, do I want to write or do I have a story I want to tell? I can say now that I want to tell Harriet's story, but when I first started, I just wanted to write a story. Any story. Anyway, let's talk about world building in the comments. I'm curious about everyone's experiences. And am I alone? Have you ever gotten fixated on researching something only for it to never make it into your story? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like if you liked the video and subscribe if you want to see more. Bye!